An argument has been raging in Berlin recently about a proposed new fence to be put up around a park. And this has inflamed passions so much that about 800 people took to the streets in protest. So, what is this park? Why do some people say it needs a fence? And why are others so vehemently against it? And fair warning, this is not going to be as cheerful as most of my videos. It's one of those stories that got darker the more I looked into it. But it does raise some important points of discussion, so let's talk about it. What we're talking about is Görlitzer Park in the district of Kreuzberg. This is close to central Berlin and is a very densely populated area, a place where long-term residents are struggling with the effects of gentrification. But before it was a park, it was a railway station, the Görlitzer Bahnhof, and it was approximately here. It was originally opened in 1866 as a terminus for trains from Görlitz, Austria and Silesia, and in fact, many of the streets and plazas in this area are named after towns, cities and regions that you could get to from this station. It was the division of Berlin after the Second World War that spelled the end of the Görlitzer Bahnhof. The station itself was just inside what became West Berlin, which meant that when the border was closed, the line was cut off by the Iron Curtain. The passenger station was closed and soon demolished, but freight trains continued to operate until 1987, although they did have to pass through a customs post at the border. Then, in 1989, the Berlin Wall famously fell, but there was no point at all in rebuilding the old station. Instead, the site was turned into a park. After all, a city the size of Berlin needs as many green spaces as will fit into it. The few remaining station buildings were incorporated into the park, but apart from that, the only thing to remind you of its history is the name of a nearby U-Bahn station. And that should have been the end of the story, but soon Görlitzer Park started to attract drug dealers. By the 2010s, it had become notorious as a hotbed of crime. In 2022, the police registered a total of 1,567 crimes in the park. Most of these were related to drug dealing, followed by violations of immigration law. In other words, foreign citizens found to have overstayed their visas. The next biggest categories were theft, physical assault and robbery, and there were also 7 sexual offences. Last summer, however, a particularly nasty case came to the attention of the police. A young couple was robbed and then the woman raped by the 3 attackers while her husband was forced to watch. At this point, the Berlin Senate decided that something needed to be done, and what needed to be done was to put a fence around the park and close it during the night, because that's when most of the crime happens. This idea is supported by the police, but is opposed by the Borough Council of Friedrichshain-Kreuzberg. Opinion among local residents is split, and it was some of those who were against the idea that we saw demonstrating. Now, of course, restricting access to a popular public space is always going to be resented by members of the public. But the protesters have more important concerns. In particular, the biggest fear is that if the criminals can't get into the park, they will instead do their criminal activities in the surrounding streets, making life less safe for residents. Crime rates are already very high in these very streets, and we don't want to push them any higher. They also point out that this is attacking the symptoms of the problem, but not the causes. Instead of waiting for people to become addicted to drugs and then arresting their dealers, we should be, for example, finding ways of making sure that people don't feel they have to turn to drugs in the first place. In response, the police have said that there will be a range of measures in place to ensure that the problem does not spill out onto residential streets, and this will be a lot easier if their officers are no longer needed to patrol the park. They can all concentrate on the streets instead. And at least one residential association has asked, what is so bad about at least giving it a try? At this point, the story takes an unexpected turn. Now, the whole debate about the fence began as a reaction to the reported gang rape that I mentioned. But earlier this year, the news came that the trial of the suspects in that case has hit a snag and is going to be delayed. The victim, or at this stage we should call her the alleged victim, has now left Germany and is back in her home country. Now, she has said that she is willing to continue testifying via video link, but this is going to take a little time to set up. That's the snag, but there's also a piece of evidence that came to light in January. It purports to be a video of the incident filmed by one of the attackers. Now, I've seen slightly different versions of this story. In one version, the court has verified that the video is real and that it does show the victim with one of the defendants and that they are having consensual sex. But in another version of the story, there are no faces visible in the video. There's no mention of whether or not the court has verified its authenticity, and there doesn't seem to be any violence being committed in the video itself. So, of course, this can be spun either way. And we shouldn't speculate. We don't have all of the facts, and even some of the facts that we do have are apparently in dispute. But I think that this is an important lesson in why politicians should not make premature knee-jerk reactions like this. But whatever the outcome of this trial, the fact remains that crime rates in Görlitzer Park are unacceptably high and something really should be done about it. The question is a big fence really the best we can do? You may be wondering about the lack of a pleasant blue glow back there. That's simply because this thing has suddenly stopped working, which just goes to prove what the Germans say: buy cheap, buy twice.